Computers are useless. They can only give you answers. This is what Pablo Picasso said about computers many years ago, and with the increase in AI usage, I feel that this might become even more true. And the reason I say this is because I can compare two groups of people. I can compare a group of people who is coming to our AI Power Software Engineering courses and AI Power Software Application courses, where they learn how to use AI assistants effectively. And on the other hand, I can compare with a group that comes to architecture courses and they use AI as they know, because we don't spend as much time discussing about how to use AI assistants effectively. And the difference between these two is, in the beginning, all developers are using AI to get answers. So they say, I want a REST API that does that, and they get the REST API. What is even more interesting, though, with AI assistants is to have conversations that lead to insights. And this is what I would like to discuss today. Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolbak and I'm coming at you from the Mosaic Work Studios. And today I want to talk about AI conversations beyond code generation. So let's ignore for a moment that we can ask the assistants to generate code for us. I think the more interesting part is what comes before. And let me give you some examples of what you can do. I'm gonna give you 3 conversation types and plus 2 extra. Research a problem, compare solutions, what if exploration, rubber duck with memory, and debug your own thinking. These are all types of conversations that I'm having with AI assistants. And then we'll discuss a little bit about why I believe this happens. Why developers focus on generating code rather than on conversations. So let's get started. The first conversation type, research a problem. An example for this is the video I made on evaluating architecture, and I had a conversation with Claude about this, and I asked, okay, I want to create a video about evaluating architecture. What are some ways of evaluating architecture? Can you research this topic and summarize the top points? And then I got a structured summary, and then we started going back and forth until we eliminated some of those, because I said, okay, this doesn't sound quite right. I prioritized the other. I asked for a classification. It generated a classification that I then edited and made sure that we have something that makes sense in my way of thinking. But the important thing here is when you research a problem, you are stating the problem and you leave it open to various options. You try not to close the assistant into giving you one final solution. And one thing that I hate about these interactions is that sometimes Claude wants to push me into the practical aspects and tell me, okay, so what do you need this for? Why is this useful? Someone keeps asking things like that, and sometimes it's just useful for exploration. I don't have any other goal, because my goal is first to figure out what is the problem space, what are the alternatives, and then for each alternative, yes, I might go into more details. But if I am in the more fuzzy part of the discussion of the problem solving part, there's no need yet to come to a conclusion. And so I often have to tell Claude, let's defer this. I don't care about that, or just ignore what he's asking me. So the pattern is open question. Very important to give an open question. So not something with yes and no answers, not something with I want a solution. You can ask for research. You get some structured research, and they are very good at structuring research. But then you need to challenge that research. First, you need to double check that the research is correct. If it provides you with resources, you need to click and see. Some of those will be intuitive because based on your experience, you can evaluate those. On some of those, you can push back. And then when it comes to categorizing things, it doesn't know necessarily how to categorize in the best way. It does some categories, but you have to change and shift the criteria and eventually edit manually the result and then feed it back to the assistant if you want to move further with the exploration. So this is problem research. Start by saying, how do you do X? Can you research and summarize top points? Can you classify options? Things like that, and then challenge every step. Second conversation style is compare solutions. Don't ask which is better, ask what breaks in each under these constraints. So for example, I had another video that is about orchestration versus choreography, and I wanted to cover a lot of different aspects. And I did that with Claude again. And my prompt was, I want to present the trade-offs of, so I want to compare orchestration versus choreography, but I want to present the trade-offs in terms of non-functional requirements and changeability. And this started the conversation. We got to examples, advantages, disadvantages. And for example, we got to the Sega pattern, and Claude said, for Sega, failure compensation is the interesting part. Should that be the primary lens for comparing orchestration versus choreographed saga? And then I said yes, and then we moved further. So the thing here is you need to ask for a comparison of solutions, and you need to give it criteria for comparing the solutions, and then it will give you some ideas on how the solutions compare, and then you need again to challenge those, to ask for clarification and so on. But it's important that here you never ask which one is better, but you need to ask for criteria. So again, again it's a conversation, because you are giving the initial request, and then it gives you something, and then you need to say, okay, that criteria doesn't quite work, that doesn't quite apply. You need to prompt the assistant with things like ask any questions you might have. Some things will become clearer when the assistant asks you clarification questions and so on. So again, comparing solutions, it's a conversation. It's not something that you say, compare these solutions, which is better. At least that's not what I would advise. Another thing is what if exploration. I had a bunch of those. I have a project that's called Moonshots, and another one that's called General Curiosity in Claude. And in these projects, I instructed the assistant specifically to avoid getting anchored into practical aspects, especially for moonshots. Moonshots by definition are, what if we did that? And if you try to anchor into practicality, then you are missing on the exploration of the problem. The important part about moonshots is that you come with various different ideas, from very obvious to extremely not obvious, and you discuss at different levels. And you get these refined little by little. And practicality can be very, very far away. So if we talked about comparing solutions, about exploring alternatives, these are higher up in the problem solving, because you take a problem, you explore alternatives, and then for each alternative you might say, okay, let's compare solutions, and you get to an implementation. But for moonshots, it's basically, let's try to formulate a problem. We kind of have a fuzzy space where we try to move in, and we discuss within this space, and we figure out what are some good problems, some good problem definitions that we need to tackle next. And the idea is to reframe the conversation. So don't let the assistant move into practical aspect. One example here was a conversation that I had on another video that we did on conversational learning. And what I said at some point, because I got a little bit frustrated that the assistant was trying to push me into practicality, allow myself to imagine possible effects of this general trend if it happens. And so the answer from the assistant was, that reframes everything. This is a speculative essay, not a prescriptive guide. And yes, that's exactly what I tried there. And in a way, this video is the continuation, the second part of the conversational learning essay, which is a speculative one. This is more practical. This is more kind of what happened to me and what might help you. Two more patterns that are interesting. Rubber duck with memory. So the rubber duck effect is well known in software development and I guess in problem solving in general. Sometimes you get anchored into a problem and just the fact that you go to a colleague and explain the problem helps you solve the problem even if you get no answer, no help from the colleague. So you basically say, hey, can you help me? I have this problem, la 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 la. Oh, I just figured it out. That's the rubber duck phenomenon. And now you can apply this with assistant. I have a problem, I haven't fully formed yet, I'll describe what I know. This is what I know. Please ask me questions so that we both understand what I am actually trying to solve. And it might happen that you, just by stating the problem, you realize, oh, that's the solution. Or it might happen that by stating the problem and asking for questions, you get at least some relevant questions that push you into the good direction. And regarding questions coming from assistants, in my experience, just not all questions coming from assistants are good, but it's good to ask questions because those that are good are actually extremely helpful. Another thing you can do is debug your own thinking. So you state your position or decision and then you ask AI to challenge it. The prompt would be, here's what I'm thinking about X. You might need to give some context. This is the context. Here's what I think. Challenge it. Critique it. What is wrong with it? Find the assumptions, find the trade-offs, find the scenarios where there is breaks. This is very, very helpful in figuring out blind spots, in figuring out trade-offs in your solutions, and so on. By the way, one of the things that I noticed is that I often tend to overcomplicate. So one of my favorite things that I do for when I do problem solving, at some steps, I ask the AI, is this too complicated? Am I overthinking this? And sometimes I actually got, yeah, this is too complicated. Let's not get there. Now, let me talk a little bit why I believe this happens. I believe this happens because developers are a self-selecting group from a group that like to work alone with a computer and very focused on result, very focused on concrete things that work, right? The best feeling is when you write code, it works, it does what you wanted it to do. That's the fundamental psychological cycle for a developer. And then the temptation is when you get an AI assistant to do exactly the same and to just follow your psychological cycle, the things that give you joy, right? Let's generate this code, generate that code, make it work. You see that it works and you just keep going. This is, by the way, also a trap because it can turn into burnout very quickly. Because you keep getting into this cycle, into this flow where you keep pushing things out, and it's just really good, really great that you finally have the speed that you imagined you could have. However, this is well documented as being an issue since it can lead to reduced knowledge. It can lead to, because you're not thinking that much anymore, reduced ability of thinking, reduced ability of understanding. It can be really bad for you. And the alternative is actually to treat your AI assistant like an artificial colleague. It's, I do something, you do something, what do you think about this? And you keep this conversation alive. And by the way, this is not a pattern that's new in software development. It's something that is used in many other disciplines. So we've seen similar things, because we didn't have AI, but similar things in aviation, for example, where you have pilot and co-pilot, right? And you have a conversation and they can censor each other, more or less. And this doesn't get you to the best results. The best results is when you treat AI as a thinking partner, right? But developers are not trained in conversation, because being a self-selected group that likes to sit down, read code, make it work, that's what we like to do. Conversation was never a really big part of what we were doing. And to me, honestly, this is the part that I missed a lot in the industry. I didn't realize it, but after many years, at some point I realized I'm missing conversations. I love these types of conversations. And now you can have these conversations with an assistant. And I believe that those are much better for you, because through these conversations, you sharpen your mind, you learn more about alternatives, about solutions, about existing technologies, and so on. And yes, you might not end up immediately with code, but by going through the actual process of refining the problem space, the solution space, and navigating through it through conversations, you keep sharp, you keep understanding what you're doing up to the level of code, where I would argue it doesn't matter anymore that much. And because you're doing this, I think this will be the productive relationship that we need to have with AI assistants in the future. But in order to do so, you will need to change from being motivated by seeing results to being motivated by exploring, by conversations that create insight. And this, my friends, might be a difficult change. So what you can do next time you use an AI assistant, don't ask it to generate things immediately. Pause. Ask yourself, do I actually know what I want, or do I hope that AI will somehow solve it? Because it won't. AI is not magic. It doesn't know what's in your head. It cannot figure out what's a good solution for your case. And at least spend 5 minutes in a research conversation first. At least ask it, I have this problem. What are my options for implementing? And you can do this out of context. So you can do this in a chat and not in Claude Code or coding assistants. Because if you're doing it in coding assistant, it will start reading through the code. Or you can tell it, don't look at the code. Let's just discuss this problem and so on. But it's nice to do this out of context, and then to move in the context when you need to do actual generation. And if you want to learn how to use these assistants effectively, join our AI Power Software Engineering course, where this is precisely what we do. AI assistants are most powerful as thinking partners, not as generators. And you have 5 conversation patterns you can use. The easiest one to start with is research, but the shift is not with the tool, it's with your habits and what motivates you. Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart. See you next Saturday.